What's up, guys? Your King Knight Vince Valentine EX Turk, and I'm gonna be uploading as much as I can because this weekend I'm not gonna be able to because I'll be at Comic-Con this weekend. So I'm gonna upload as much as I can. So let's talk about the changes. Yeah, I'm wearing this jacket because it's cold down here, so sue me. But anyways, we're gonna be talking about the changes from Final Fantasy 15, versus 13 to 15. In this discussion and what made this different. Now, besides the discarded concepts and the discarded, concept art and stuff like that, there's actually a lot more stuff going on with the changes than just that. As you can see, Tetsuo Norma wanted to make a compilation for Final Fantasy 15. And that's what's been pushing this back. So Tabata took over the project and released it in November 2017. So this is why I wanted to talk about this, because I've been wanting to talk about this for a while, but I just didn't have the opportune or perfect time to talk about the changes. But besides the changes in combat and the concepts and stuff like that, and how the game's played and the maps, let's talk about the story changes. As for one, Idolus was a big villain in Final Fantasy Versus 13, really big. Like, everybody knew who he was in Versus 13 because he was that big of a villain. Well, they changed in Final Fantasy 15. Arden became the big villain. Idolus became only a smaller picture. In fact, he barely got used until they had that the chapter 13 verse 2 free update. If it wasn't for that free update, you'd barely see Idolus in Final Fantasy 15. But you get the point. That's changed, and the fact in Final Fantasy 15, you couldn't go back to Insomnia. Like, Insomnia was the first place you started in Versus 13. As you see in the trailers, if people say, or anyone who's lucky enough to play, if anyone's lucky enough to play the demos when they were coming out, then they got to see these changes. But if you missed out, well, then you just missed out. So you had to depend on the trailers. From what I see in the trailers, in Versus 13, you actually got to play in Insomnia, but for the first thing, meaning that this was really supposed to be a trilogy game. This was supposed to be like how it was with Final Fantasy 13. This was supposed to be like this when 15 came out. But Tabata says, no, let's just cram it on in and just sell the game before people take their money out of this and the pre-orders and thus losing us some money. Then we have to go back and, let's see, make up for it by putting all these patches in. But, alright, besides that, that's just my little rant right there I just did about that. But things are different. The story's different. Now, they had to tone some stuff down because they were going to sell this game with China. And China, they really want their stuff a lot more censored than what we want. Like, first of all, you couldn't have the Lucius Kings worship the Grim Reaper or Death. In Etro, if you know anything about Etro and the mythology of Etro, Etro is the goddess of death. She's the Grim Reaper. You couldn't have no death worshipping in there, so they had to remove that. And they had to remove kids losing their mind and killing people when they hear voices in their head, because I would love that concept, because let's be honest, Final Fantasy games are supposed to be a little darker. I think the only reason why they get away with the darkness in Final Fantasy VI is because it's a Super Nintendo game, and it's not going to affect any of the younger audiences. But when you got the cinematic game like Final Fantasy 15, you're going to have to cut some stuff down. And not only that, we do have SJWs to contend with. So if an SJW finds one thing wrong about the game, well, they ain't going to, like other publishers, every other game publishers, they feel the need to listen to these people. And kind of rightfully so, because let's just be honest, they own game journalism now. So, because they wanted to make sure younger viewers could play it, but also make it so social justice warriors don't get blazing mad, they had to tone the game's themes down, which took the darkness a little bit out. Final Fantasy 15 was still dark, because let's just be quite honest. Arden Insomnia is an allegory for the devil, pretty much, if you really think about it. But, you know, so the game was dark as it possibly could be. So, you know, it was as dark as it possibly could be. But the problem is with all of this is that it could have been a much darker game. But they took it out. Now, so, besides censorship, and they had to change, since this was a new concept, Etro became EOS, as you know. You know. And they, besides visual changes, again, we're not going to talk about visual changes. We know Noctis gets a different outfit. We know Gladiolus. I mean, I hope one day they bring the Versus 13 DLC costumes, at least episode Prompto, where you can actually get the Versus 13 outfits, or in one update where you get the Versus 13 outfits. Like Noctis's turtleneck that goes around his face like that, and Prompto's just wife beater with that vest that was pretty good, and that hair. Hopefully they make those costumes for 15, because Versus 13 is no longer there, and we're gonna have to stop asking for Versus 13 because it's not gonna happen. So unfortunately, I wanted to have that chapter where Noctis goes in the world of Versus, and it made sense to do that, but it's not going to happen. Even if we pour a lot of money into it, it's not one of Square Enix's priorities. You know, they have priorities. If you wanted to have a world of Versus, then you should have signed a petition that they had. But even then, it wouldn't work because it's not one of their priorities. The other changes in Final Fantasy Versus 13 to 15 was there is no King's Glaive in Versus because King's Slave was part 1 of Versus. The only thing is, it was altered and different. The characters of Nyx Ulrich, Crow Atlas, Libertus, Titus Dronatus, which is General Glocka, those characters never exist at all in Versus 13. Those characters never existed. Now, there were early concepts of General Glocka because, again, when they made 15, they just added some stuff in it that was not in Versus 13. So, there's your visual changes right there. Well, there's your changes right there, but those characters never existed. And let's, now, a younger Regis. Yeah, Regis was a lot younger in the other one. He looked like a mob boss. He looked like the Godfather. I think the only reason why they made Regis older is they changed the concept a little bit. Regis used that magical barrier using the Ring of Lucii. And the old war, which is the Ring of Lucii, pretty much, weakens you. It weakens you. Unless you get the powers that Noctis got. But then again, Noctis had to offer his body up. His complete body. So he can use the Ring of Lucii without no damage on him. Except for, like, drained MP. But Regis didn't make such a deal. So he just pretty much lost most of his youth using the Ring of Lucii. Which I kind of like the older Regis because it makes sense. I mean, first of all, his son's 20 years old. 21 to 22 at least. Noctis is 21, 22 at least. Regis should be at least in his 40s. At least in his 40s. So I like the change a little bit. Even though he's a Lucius king, they wanted to make it realistic. You know, a fantasy based off of reality. Now, they kind of stretched that a little bit for 15, but that is realistic a little bit, kind of, because you should be at least 48 if your son's 20-something years old at this point, you know, of the game. So I think the only way they got away with doing that with staying into continuity is that King Regis overused the ring's magic, which he said in the movie about the Old War. And the Old War is the Ring of Lucii. He used half his power to make that barrier so the Niflheim Empire couldn't just go drop bombs like they usually do to get the crystals. So with that and the other changes, Arden becomes the main villain and the main focus because Arden's a Lucius Caelum. And they wanted to make this based off Lucius Caelum's. Arden became the main villain and the ruler of the Star Scourge instead of Idolus Outercrab. Though Idolus Outercrab was a good pawn to Arden, you know, as well, he shares the same power of the Star Scourge. Just Arden controls the Star Scourge. He only gave some of that power to Idolus, as you see in chapter 13 verses 2. Idolus was able to summon demons to go after Ravus for betraying him. So they still kept Idolus as one of the main villains, but he wasn't the main threat. The main threat was Arden Lucius Caelium, because he played both the Niflheim Empire and the Kingdom of Insomnia. And the other concept that in verses 13 that they don't have in verses 13 that's in 15 is Stella was supposed to be the final boss, which was Luna Freya pretty much in verses 13, which they scrapped it out pretty much, which I kind of glad they did because they would be copying, I don't know, something else if they did that. You know, I like a darker game, but that's pushing barriers right there. And I can see why feminists would get mad about that stuff, so I can see why they took that out of the game at least. And the other concept that in Final Fantasy 15 that Versus 13 never had was Older Noctis. Because this was supposed to be a trilogy and they crammed it all in one game, which they should just had a trilogy. Because chapter 13 is when everything went downhill until we got that chapter 13 verses 2, but it's still kind of not enough because we don't know what happened in the 10 years when, you know, Noctis was in a crystal stasis, you know, in the crystal stasis, crystal meditation. We don't know what exactly happened, which still kind of upsets us. They need to fill it in, whether it's whether it's the world of Versus, or they just explain what happens to the world where you play as Prompto, Ignis, and Gladiolus and figure out everything that's happening on time skip Eris. But besides that, Older Noctis was only a concept of Final Fantasy 15. He was only in 15. Older Noctis never existed in Versus 13 because Versus 13 would have you fight Stella in the end. That's why in the bad guys bracket you saw Stella in the end. And they wanted to make it original like Versus 13. That's why you saw in the original Villains and Heroes bracket, you saw the Versus 13, but they changed so many concepts. Instead, they had the girl die by the main villain's hand, which I kind of don't mind because Final Fantasy, it's iconic for a female character, the main female character, to die by the villain's hands in order to, you know, in order to make the hero avenge them later on. But nonetheless, Older Noctis, and I don't even think the Star Scourge was part of the original concept of Versus 13 as well, come to think of it. I think they wanted to keep it with Lassie and Fal'Cie. Like, the Fal'Cie was making the world dark, but since this has changed, and they had to change concept, they had to switch to the Star Scourge, which made a lot more sense if you ask me, and it did keep its darkness. This game, 15 did keep its darkness, it's just not as dark as it could be, but understandably so, this is the decision they had to make for money. So may the crystal be with you guys, and tell me what you think. Like, share, comment below if you think they should have stayed to the original concept, or is this good enough? Let me know.